My name is Simone, and I am 36 years old. I used to be a high school teacher in Portland, Oregon, living what everyone around me thought was the perfect life. I had a beautiful home in a quiet neighborhood, a job I loved, and a husband who on the surface seemed like everything a woman could want. We had been married for 2 years, and I was 7 months pregnant with our first child. A baby girl we had already started calling our little miracle. But what no one knew, what I did not even fully understand, until it was almost too late, was that the man I promised to spend my life with was capable of something so horrific, so unthinkable, that it would nearly cost me and my baby our lives. The world saw Darius and me as a beacon of Black excellence. We were the couple that people pointed to when they wanted to believe that hard work and faith could grant you access to the American dream. Darius worked in high finance, wearing tailored suits that cost more than my first car, and driving a luxury sedan that purred like a jungle cat. I was the educator, the woman molding the minds of the next generation, respected by my colleagues and adored by my students. We went to church on Sundays, we hosted dinner parties with the right wine and the right jazz music playing softly in the background, and we smiled until our cheeks ached. But behind the heavy oak door of our pristine home, the air was often so thick with tension that I felt like I was choking. Being 7 months pregnant is a physical marathon that no one can truly prepare you for. The books tell you about the glow and the excitement, but they rarely describe the sheer heaviness that settles into your bones. My ankles were swollen to twice their normal size, throbbing with a dull ache that never really went away. My back felt like it was constantly on the verge of snapping under the weight of the life growing inside me. Every movement was a negotiation with gravity. Getting out of bed was a struggle. Standing for too long to cook dinner felt like a punishment. Yet I did it all with a smile, because that is what was expected of me. I was trapped not just by my marriage, but by a stereotype that has haunted women who look like me for generations. The fear of being labeled the angry Black woman is a silent cage that many of us live in. I learned very early on that I could not afford to raise my voice. I could not afford to show displeasure or fatigue or frustration, because the moment I did, the world would strip away my humanity and reduce me to a caricature. If I complained about Darius coming home late, I was being a nag. If I expressed exhaustion from keeping the house spotless while working full-time and growing a human being, I was being ungrateful. So I swallowed my feelings. I pushed down the anxiety that fluttered in my chest like a trapped bird. I told myself that I was being strong. I told myself that keeping the peace was the noble thing to do. This internal battle was constant. There were days when Darius would make a comment about the dust on the mantelpiece, or the way I had folded his shirts, and I would feel a flash of hot rage burn in my throat. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him that I was tired, that I needed help, that I was not a maid, but his wife and the mother of his child. But then the fear would kick in. I did not want to be the loud woman. I did not want to be the difficult wife. I did not want to give anyone a reason to say that I was the problem. So I would apologize. I would say, "I am sorry, Darius. I will do better next time." I would diminish myself to make him feel big. I convinced myself that this was love. I convinced myself that compromise meant erasing parts of myself to fit into the space he allowed me to occupy. My intuition was screaming at me during those long months. It was a voice in the back of my head whispering that this was not normal, that love should not feel like walking on eggshells. But I was an expert at ignoring that voice. I covered it up with excuses. I told myself that Darius was just stressed from work. I told myself that he was just particular about things because he wanted the best for us. I told myself that once the baby came, things would soften. I was wrong. The pregnancy did not soften him. It only seemed to sharpen his edges. As my belly grew rounder and my body became more vulnerable, his need for control tightened like a noose. I remember standing in front of the mirror in our bathroom one morning, turning to the side to look at my silhouette. At 7 months, my stomach was high and tight, a testament to the daughter growing strong within me. I placed my hands on my belly, feeling her shift and kick, and a wave of fierce protectiveness washed over me. But right underneath that love was a current of dread. I looked at my own eyes in the reflection, and I saw the exhaustion there, not just physical tiredness, but a deep spiritual fatigue. I was playing a role in a play that was slowly turning into a tragedy, and I did not know how to get off the stage. I adjusted my dress, smoothed down my hair, and put on my mask. I had to keep up appearances. I had to protect the image of the happy family, even if it was killing me from the inside out. Let me take you back to the beginning, before the fear set in. 2 years before that terrible day, I met Darius at a teacher's conference. He was not a teacher, but he was there as a guest speaker for a financial literacy workshop. He was charming, attentive, and successful. He pursued me with the kind of intensity that felt romantic at the time. He sent flowers to my classroom. He surprised me with dinner reservations at the most exclusive restaurants in the city. He listened to me when I talked about my students and my dreams. It felt like I had finally been chosen. It felt like a fairy tale. Looking back now with the clarity that only trauma and survival can provide, I can see it for what it really was. It was not romance. It was a siege. It was love bombing designed to overwhelm my defenses and make me dependent on his validation. He was studying me. He was learning my insecurities and my desires so that he could use them against me later. There is one memory that stands out vividly, a moment that should have been the biggest red flag of them all. It was about a year into our relationship, just a few months before we got engaged. I had been nominated for the Teacher of the Year award in our district. It was a huge honor. I had worked tirelessly with at-risk students developing a reading program that had raised literacy rates significantly. When they announced my name at the banquet, I felt a surge of pride so strong it nearly brought me to tears. I walked up to the stage in my emerald green gown, accepted the plaque, and looked out at the sea of applauding faces. I felt seen. I felt valued for my mind and my hard work. When I returned to the table, Darius stood up and kissed my cheek. He was smiling, but his eyes were cold. As the applause died down and people began to return to their meals, he leaned in close to my ear. I expected him to say he was proud of me. I expected him to say I deserved it. Instead, he whispered something that chilled me to the bone. He said, "Enjoy the moment, Simone, but do not let it go to your head. You know how these things work. They needed to fill a diversity quota, and you were the perfect face for it. They just needed to show they are inclusive. Do not mistake their politics for your actual talent." The words hit me like a physical blow. I pulled back and looked at him, searching for a sign that he was joking. But his face was perfectly serious. There was a smugness in his expression, a subtle smirk, that told me he enjoyed taking me down a peg. In that moment of my greatest professional triumph, he could not stand to let me shine. He had to remind me that in his eyes I was less than. He had to plant the seed of doubt in my mind to make me question my own worth. I should have left him that night. I should have taken my plaque and walked out the door and never looked back. But I did not. I was shocked and hurt, but then the gaslighting began. Later, when I confronted him about it, he told me I was being too sensitive. He told me he was just trying to keep me humble, to protect me from the harsh realities of the world. He twisted it until I ended up apologizing to him for being ungrateful for his honesty. That was his gift. He could take a knife he had stabbed you with and convince you that you had walked into it yourself. That night was a turning point, even if I did not want to admit it. After that, the control became more overt. It started with the phone. He always wanted to know where I was, who I was with, and what I was doing. He would text me constantly throughout the day. If I did not respond within 5 minutes, he would call. If I did not answer the call, he would call the school office claiming there was an emergency just to get me on the line. He disguised it as concern. He would say, "I just worry about you, Simone. The world is a dangerous place, and I need to know you are safe." It sounded sweet to my friends. They told me I was lucky to have a man who cared so much. My mother thought I had finally found a good protector, but it did not feel like protection. It felt like surveillance. He started to make comments about my friends. He would say that my best friend Tasha was a bad influence because she was single and loud. He would say that my colleagues were jealous of our relationship, and I should not trust them. Slowly, systematically, he began to isolate me. He made me feel guilty for spending time with anyone but him. If I went out for coffee with a friend, I would come home to the silent treatment. He would not yell. He would just withdraw, withholding his affection until I begged for forgiveness. I learned that it was easier to just stay home. It was easier to decline the invitations. It was easier to make my world smaller and smaller until it only contained Darius. I told myself I was prioritizing my marriage. I told myself that this is what wives did. We sacrificed. We compromised. We put our husbands first. By the time we got married, I was already accustomed to asking for permission without actually asking. I would check his mood before I spoke. I would curate my stories to ensure nothing I said would trigger his insecurity or his jealousy. I thought I was managing our relationship, but I was actually managing his ego. And then I got pregnant. We had been trying for 6 months, and when I saw those 2 pink lines, I cried tears of pure joy. I thought a baby would fix things. I thought fatherhood would bring out the best in him. I thought that creating a life together would finally make us true partners. For a few weeks, it seemed like I was right. Darius was ecstatic. He posted the announcement on social media, writing a long caption about how blessed he was. He bought me flowers. He touched my stomach with wonder. But as the reality of the pregnancy set in, the old Darius returned with a vengeance. As my body began to change, he became critical. He monitored what I ate. He made comments about my weight gain, telling me I needed to be careful not to let myself go. He acted as if my body was public property, something that existed solely to incubate his heir rather than a human vessel, deserving of respect and care. By the 7th month, the emotional abuse had become a daily ritual. I was working full-time, standing on my feet all day teaching, trying to manage a classroom of 30 teenagers, and then coming home to a second shift of cooking and cleaning because Darius did not believe in household chores. He said that was women work. He said his mother had raised 3 boys and kept a spotless house, and he expected the same from me. I was exhausted. My feet were swollen. My back ached constantly. But if I sat down to rest before dinner was on the table, he would look at me with disgust. He would say, "You are using the pregnancy as a crutch, Simone. You are being lazy. My mother worked until the day she delivered. You are just soft. Soft." That word cut me deep. I was not soft. I was carrying his child. I was working. I was surviving. But to him, I was failing. I was failing to meet the impossible standard of the superwoman who does it all without breaking a sweat. I pushed down the uncomfortable feeling in my gut that told me this was not normal, that this was suffocating. I told myself I was lucky to have a husband who provided for us. I looked at the bank account. I looked at the house. I looked at the nursery filled with expensive furniture, and I told myself that this was security. I did not realize that a golden cage is still a cage. I did not realize that the man who was supposed to be my partner was actually my jailer. The control tightened as the due date approached. He started checking the mileage on my car to make sure I had only gone to work and back. He demanded to see the receipts for everything I bought for the baby, questioning every dollar. He made me feel like I was a child who could not be trusted with adult responsibilities, and underneath it all was that simmering jealousy. He resented the attention I got from people because of the pregnancy. He resented the baby shower my friends threw for me because for one afternoon, I was the center of attention, and he was just a guest. He made snide comments about the gifts, saying we did not need charity. He ruined the joy of the occasion, making me feel guilty for being celebrated. I was walking on a tightrope, balancing the physical demands of a difficult 3rd trimester with the emotional labor of managing a volatile man. I was tired. God, I was so tired. But I kept going. I kept smiling. I kept pretending that everything was fine because the alternative was to admit that I had made a terrible mistake. And at 7 months pregnant with a nursery waiting and a life growing inside me, admitting that mistake felt like jumping off a cliff. By the time I reached the 7-month mark, the atmosphere in our home had shifted from subtle tension to open hostility. The honeymoon phase of the pregnancy, if it ever truly existed, had evaporated completely, leaving behind a residue of bitterness that coated everything we did. 7 months is a pivotal time. You are no longer in the cute stage where the bump is small and manageable. You are large. You are heavy. The baby is pressing against your ribs and your bladder, making every breath shallow and every movement a calculated effort. My ankles had disappeared, swallowed by swelling that throbbed with a dull, persistent ache by the end of the school day. But instead of sympathy or support, what I received from Darius was a cold, clinical scrutiny that made me feel like a specimen under a microscope rather than his wife. The change was not overnight, but by the third trimester, it was impossible to ignore. In the beginning, he had treated my body like a temple, but now he treated it like a failing project. He became obsessed with my weight gain. Every meal became a battleground. I remember one Tuesday evening vividly. I had come home from a grueling day of parent-teacher conferences. I was starving. The kind of hunger that is primal and deep, the kind that comes from growing another human being who is demanding nutrients. I made myself a plate of pasta leftovers, nothing extravagant, just enough to silence the gnawing in my stomach. Darius walked into the kitchen just as I was taking my first bite. He did not say hello. He did not ask how my day was. He just looked at the plate and then looked at my stomach with a sneer that curled his upper lip. He said, "Are you really going to eat all of that, Simone? The doctor said you need to watch your intake. You are already gaining more than the recommended amount. You are going to be huge if you keep stuffing your face like that." I put the fork down, the food suddenly turning to ash in my mouth. I tried to explain that I had not eaten since lunch, that the baby was hungry. But he cut me off. He said, "Do not blame the baby for your lack of self-control. Look at Kevin's wife. She was in the gym until her 8th month. She snapped back 2 weeks after delivery. You are using this pregnancy as an excuse to let yourself go. It is embarrassing." His words were like precise surgical cuts designed to sever my self-esteem. He knew exactly where I was vulnerable. He knew I worried about the changes in my body. He knew I feared losing my attractiveness to him. And instead of reassuring me, he weaponized my insecurities. He compared me to women on Instagram, to the wives of his colleagues, to anyone who fit his impossible standard of perfection. To him, a pregnant woman should be effortless. She should glow, but not sweat. She should grow a belly, but nowhere else. She should be motherly, but remain a sexual object for his pleasure. I was failing on all counts. The accusations of laziness were perhaps the most hurtful. Darius seemed to have forgotten that I was still working full-time. I was on my feet for 8 hours a day, managing a classroom of 30 teenagers, dealing with administrative paperwork and grading assignments. When I came home, my body was screaming for rest. I would collapse onto the sofa, needing just 20 minutes to elevate my swollen feet before starting dinner. But if Darius walked in and saw me sitting down, his mood would instantly darken. He would scan the living room looking for something out of place, a stray magazine, a coaster not perfectly aligned, a speck of dust on the television stand. He would say, "Must be nice to sit around all day." I have been busting my hump at the firm, dealing with million-dollar accounts, and I come home to this. "You cannot even manage to keep the house tidy. What do you do all day, Simone?" The injustice of it burned behind my eyes. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to tell him that I was growing his daughter, that my body was doing the most important work in the world. I wanted to list every task I had completed that day, every student I had helped, every lesson I had taught. But the exhaustion silenced me. Fighting him took energy I simply did not have. So I would get up. I would force my aching body off the couch, and I would start cleaning. I would cook dinner while my back seized up in spasms, trying to earn the approval that he withheld so cruelly. The loneliness of those nights was a physical weight heavier than the baby in my womb. I would lie in bed next to him, staring at the ceiling, tears sliding silently down my temples into my hair. This was supposed to be the happiest time of our lives. We were supposed to be a team preparing to welcome a new life. We should have been talking about names and nursery colors and hopes for her future. Instead, there was a chasm between us so wide I did not know how to cross it. I looked at the man sleeping beside me, his breathing steady and untroubled, and I felt a profound sense of loss. He was supposed to be my protector. That is what we are taught in church. That is what my father taught me. The husband protects the wife. He shields her from the world. But who protects the wife when the danger is the husband? Who protects her when the person who promised to cherish her is the one chipping away at her soul piece by piece? I felt incredibly ugly during those weeks. Not because of my body, which was doing something miraculous, but because I was being looked at without love. When you are looked at with disgust long enough, you start to believe you are disgusting. I avoided mirrors. I wore baggy clothes to hide my shape even inside the house. I stopped singing to my belly because I felt like my sadness would somehow seep through my skin and poison my daughter. I was grieving the death of my marriage while still living in it. I was mourning the man I thought Darius was the charming, attentive suitor who had swept me off my feet. That man was gone, replaced by a stranger with cold eyes and a sharp tongue. And the terrifying part was realizing that the stranger was the real him. The charming man had been the mask. This cruel, controlling tyrant was the reality. I felt isolated in my own home, a prisoner in a house that looked perfect from the outside. I wanted to call my mother. I wanted to tell my best friend. But shame is a powerful silencer. How could I tell them that my successful, handsome husband called me fat and lazy? How could I admit that I was scared of his temper? How could I shatter the image of black excellence that we had worked so hard to build? I did not want their pity. I did not want to hear "I told you so." So I kept quiet. I endured. I told myself that once Simone was born, he would change. When he held his daughter in his arms, his heart would melt and he would remember how to love us. I clung to that hope like a drowning woman clinging to a piece of driftwood. It was the only thing that kept me getting out of bed in the morning. I did not know then that things were about to get much worse. I did not know that the verbal abuse and the emotional neglect were just the prelude to a violence that would nearly destroy us. I did not know that the arrival of his mother would be the spark that ignited the powder keg he had been building under our lives for months. I just kept praying, kept rubbing my belly, and kept waiting for a miracle that was not coming from him. The announcement came on a Tuesday evening just as the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across our living room floor. I was sitting on the beige sectional sofa with my feet propped up on the ottoman, trying to find a position that did not make my lower back scream in protest. Darius was standing by the window scrolling through his phone with that detached expression he had perfected over the last few months. The air in the house was still, but it was the kind of stillness that precedes a storm. I was just about to ask him if he wanted water when he spoke without looking up from his screen. He said, "My mother is coming to stay with us next week. She will be here on Monday, and she is staying for 7 days to help with the baby preparations." The words landed like stones in the quiet room. My stomach, which was already compressed by the weight of my 7-month pregnancy, did a painful flip. I sat up straighter, ignoring the sharp pull in my round ligaments. I stared at his profile, waiting for him to tell me he was joking, or at least that he was asking for my opinion. But he just kept scrolling his thumb, moving rhythmically over the glass screen. I said, "Darius, you cannot be serious. We barely have enough room as it is, and I am exhausted. I cannot play hostess right now. I need rest, not a house guest. Why did you not discuss this with me first?" He finally turned to look at me, and his eyes were void of empathy. He looked at me as if I were a petulant child refusing to eat her vegetables. He put his phone in his pocket and crossed his arms over his chest, his expensive watch glinting in the fading light. He said, "This is not a discussion, Simone. She is my mother. She wants to be here to ensure everything is ready for her grandchild. In my family, we honor our elders. We do not turn away help. You should be grateful she is willing to drive all this way to assist you, since you seem to be struggling so much on your own." I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. Struggling. That was how he saw my exhaustion. That was how he saw the physical toll of carrying his child. I tried to argue. I tried to explain that his mother made me uncomfortable, that her presence was more draining than helpful. But he cut me off with a wave of his hand. He said, "Stop being selfish. This is about tradition. It is about family. My mother raised 3 successful men on her own. She knows what is best. You could learn a thing or two from her if you stopped being so defensive." I sank back into the cushions, defeated. It was not just the lack of consultation that terrified me. It was the woman herself. Ms. Viola was not just a mother-in-law. She was a force of nature, a matriarch who wielded her approval like a weapon. From the moment I met her 2 years ago, I knew I would never be good enough. To her, I was an outsider. I was a public school teacher from a working-class neighborhood in North Portland. I did not come from the right family. I did not have the right pedigree. Darius came from a line of doctors and lawyers, a family that prided itself on being part of the black elite. They were the kind of people who cared deeply about appearances, about which social clubs you belonged to, and where you summered. Ms. Viola had made it clear from day one that she considered me a charity case. She looked at my hair, my clothes, and my family with a polite disdain that was far more cutting than any insult. I remembered the first time I went to her house for Sunday dinner. She had looked at my shoes, which were sensible heels from a department store, and asked if I was having financial trouble because she could recommend a good cobbler to fix the scuff on the toe. I had not even noticed the scuff, but she had. She noticed everything. She saw every flaw, every imperfection, every way in which I failed to measure up to the imaginary princess she had chosen for her son in her mind. The fear I felt now was not just about having to clean the house or cook extra meals. It was a primal fear. My intuition was screaming that this visit was dangerous. It felt like a tightening in my chest that had nothing to do with the baby. I knew that Darius had been complaining to her. I knew that they had been talking about me. The way he looked at me now, with that mixture of annoyance and superiority, told me that he was bringing in reinforcements. He was bringing in the one person who could make me feel smaller than he did. I spent the next 5 days in a frenzy of anxiety. I scrubbed baseboards until my knees bruised. I washed every sheet and towel in the house. I organized the pantry labeling jars that did not need labeling, just so she could not criticize my housekeeping. I was nesting not out of joy, but out of fear. I was trying to build a fortress of perfection to protect myself from her judgment. But deep down, I knew it was futile. You cannot please someone who is committed to misunderstanding you. You cannot impress someone who needs you to fail to validate their own superiority. The day Ms. Viola arrived, the sky was a bruised purple color threatening rain. I had taken a half-day off from school to prepare a welcome dinner. My feet were swollen so badly that I had to wear my house slippers because my regular shoes would not fit. I stood in the kitchen for 3 hours, chopping vegetables, searing meat, and seasoning the sauce for a roast that Darius had said was her favorite. My back was throbbing with a relentless rhythm, but I pushed through it. I wanted this to go well. I needed this to go well. When the doorbell rang at 5 in the afternoon, I took a deep breath, smoothed down my maternity dress, and waddled to the door. I put on my best smile, the one I used for angry parents and difficult administrators. I opened the door, and there she stood. Ms. Viola looked impeccable. She was 62 years old, but she looked 10 years younger. She was wearing a cream-colored cashmere coat that probably cost more than my monthly salary, and her silver hair was coiffed into a perfect, elegant bob. Her eyes, sharp and assessing, swept over me instantly. She did not say hello. She did not ask how I was feeling. She stepped across the threshold carrying the scent of expensive rose perfume and cold air. She looked around the entryway, her nose wrinkling slightly as if she smelled something unpleasant. She said, "It is freezing in here, Simone. Are you trying to make my grandbaby sick before she is even born? Darius likes the house at a comfortable 72 degrees. This feels like an ice box." I closed the door behind her, feeling the warmth drain out of my own body. I explained that I was running hot because of the pregnancy, but she was already walking away, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. She moved through the living room, running a gloved finger along the back of the sofa, inspecting for dust. I watched her, feeling like a stranger in my own home. Darius came down the stairs, then greeting her with a hug that was warmer than anything he had given me in months. He took her coat. He took her bag. He asked her about her drive. They stood there talking and laughing, a united front, while I stood in the kitchen doorway, holding a wooden spoon, my hand trembling slightly. Dinner was a disaster from the moment we sat down. I had set the table with our good china, polished the silverware until it gleamed, and placed fresh flowers in the center. I brought out the roast, the garlic mashed potatoes, and the glazed carrots. The steam rose from the dishes, carrying the savory aroma of hours of labor. I served Ms. Viola first, carefully placing the best cuts of meat on her plate. She picked up her fork and poked at the meat. She did not take a bite. She just moved it around the plate, inspecting the texture. Then she looked up at me with a smile that did not reach her eyes. She said, "Oh, honey, this looks very ambitious. But you know Darius has a sensitive stomach. This creates too much acid. I usually poach his chicken with just a little lemon and herbs." This heavy seasoning is not good for him. It is a bit peasant style, is it not? I felt tears prick the back of my eyes. I looked at Darius, waiting for him to defend me, waiting for him to say that the food was delicious, that I had worked hard on it. But he just shrugged, cutting into his meat. He said, "Yeah, it is a bit heavy, Mother. Simone likes her spices. I guess it is just what she is used to." The betrayal stung worse than the criticism. He loved my roast. He had asked for it specifically. But in front of her, he was willing to throw me under the bus just to align himself with her standards. Ms. Viola took a tiny bite, chewed slowly, and then set her fork down. She wiped her mouth with the linen napkin and looked at me across the table. Her gaze was direct, piercing, and filled with a cold calculation. She said, "You know, Simone, I was just telling Darius the other day about Dr. Johnson's daughter. You remember her, Darius? Clarissa. She just finished her residency at Johns Hopkins. Such a brilliant girl. And she comes from such good stock. Her grandfather founded the first black bank in the city." I froze, my fork hovering halfway to my mouth. I knew where this was going. I had heard variations of this speech before, but never this blatant, never this cruel. She continued, ignoring my frozen silence. I always thought she and Darius would make such a power couple. "You know how important it is to keep the bloodline strong, to marry someone who understands our world, someone who was raised with the same values. It is a shame, really. Clarissa would have known exactly how to run a household like this. She has that natural breeding that you just cannot teach." The room went silent. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. She had not just insulted my cooking. She had insulted my blood. She had called me a mistake to my face. She had said that I was genetically inferior, that I was a pollution in their pristine family line. I looked at Darius, desperate for him to stop her. This was his wife she was talking about. This was the mother of his child. But Darius did not look angry. He did not look shocked. He threw his head back and laughed, a loud, hearty laugh that echoed off the walls. He said, "Oh, Mother, you are terrible. Clarissa was always a bit too intense for me, but you are right. She definitely knew her way around a kitchen better than this." He gestured vaguely at the meal I had spent 3 hours preparing with my swollen feet and aching back. He dismissed my effort, my love, and my dignity with a wave of his fork. He treated his mother cruel racism as a joke, a witty observation between peers. I sat there feeling the blood drain from my face. I looked from Darius to Ms. Viola, and I saw the resemblance clearly for the first time. It was not just in their features. It was in their cruelty. It was in the way they bonded over making someone else feel small. I was not part of this family. I was the entertainment. I was the punching bag they used to strengthen their own alliance. I placed my hand on my stomach, feeling Imani kick hard against my ribs. It felt like she was protesting, like she was angry on my behalf. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to flip the table. I wanted to tell them both to get out of my house. But I was trapped. I was heavy, I was tired, and I was outnumbered. I lowered my head, staring at my plate, forcing myself to breathe. I swallowed the lump in my throat, which tasted like ash and bile. I realized then that this week was going to be a battle for survival. Ms. Viola had not come to help. She had come to break me. And Darius was going to hold the door open while she did it. The invasion of my home began quietly but devastatingly on the second day of Ms. Viola's stay. I returned home from school on Tuesday afternoon, dragging my swollen feet and aching back, longing for nothing more than a glass of ice water and 10 minutes of silence. As soon as I unlocked the front door, the smell hit me. It was not the comforting aroma of my own home, which usually smelled of vanilla and shea butter. It was the sharp chemical scent of bleach and a floral disinfectant that burned my nose. I walked into the kitchen and stopped dead in my tracks. My sanctuary, the place where I experimented with recipes and found peace after long days of teaching, had been completely dismantled. The counters were bare, stripped of the cute ceramic jars where I kept my flour and sugar. My spice rack, which I had organized alphabetically, was gone. In its place were sleek, unlabeled glass containers that looked cold and sterile. I opened the pantry door and gasped. My favorite seasonings, the specialized blends I ordered from a small Black-owned business in New Orleans, the seasoned salt that had been a staple in my family for generations, were gone. The shelves were lined with expensive organic brands that I had never bought. I felt a rising panic in my chest, not over the spices themselves, but over the sheer audacity of the erasure. It was as if she was trying to scrub away any trace of my identity from my own kitchen. Ms. Viola walked in, then holding a trash bag. She did not look apologetic. She looked triumphant. She told me that she had done me a favor. She said that my pantry was filled with sodium and processed garbage that would poison her grandchild. She claimed that a woman of her status would never cook with such cheap ingredients, and that she was upgrading my standards for Darius' sake. I tried to speak to tell her that those were my things, that this was my house, but she talked over me. She told me to go upstairs and rest because I looked haggard. She said that she would handle the kitchen since clearly I did not know how to manage a proper household. I went upstairs, my hands shaking with suppressed rage, only to find a second battlefield awaiting me. The door to my walk-in closet was open. Clothes were piled on the bed. My maternity clothes, the leggings that were the only things that fit my swollen legs comfortably, the oversized sweaters that hid my changing shape, the soft cotton dresses I lived in. Ms. Viola followed me into the room, her eyes sweeping over the pile with disdain. She told me that she was clearing out the clutter. She said that just because I was pregnant did not mean I had to dress like a washerwoman. She held up one of my favorite tunics between two fingers as if it were contaminated. She said that a wife of Darius' stature should maintain her elegance at all times. She said that letting myself look frumpy was disrespectful to my husband, and that men strayed when their wives stopped trying. That night, I tried to talk to Darius. We were in bed, the lights off, the only illumination coming from the street lamp outside. I turned to him, my voice trembling as I told him about the spices and the clothes. I told him that his mother was crossing a line that I felt violated in my own home. Darius sighed, a long, exasperated sound in the darkness. He did not reach out to comfort me. He did not pull me close. He just rolled over his back to me and told me to stop complaining. He said, "My mother is just trying to help you, Simone. She bought hundreds of dollars worth of high-quality groceries, and you are whining about some cheap salt. You are being irrational. It is the hormones. You are reading too much into everything. Just let her help. She knows better than you do about these things." He made me feel crazy. He made me feel small. He twisted the reality until I was the ungrateful villain and his mother was the benevolent savior. I lay there in the dark, tears leaking from my eyes, feeling the walls of my own house closing in on me. I was being erased, replaced by a version of a wife that Ms. Viola approved of, and Darius was letting it happen. The breaking point, however, came 2 days later in the form of a digital revelation that shattered whatever remaining trust I had in my marriage. It was Thursday morning. Darius was in the shower and his iPad was sitting on the nightstand. I usually respected his privacy, but I needed to check the tracking number for the crib mattress we had ordered. My phone was dead, so I picked up his tablet. I unlocked it, knowing his passcode was his birthday, and tapped on the browser. But instead of the browser, the message app opened. It was a thread between Darius and a contact saved as Mother Dearest. I knew I should put it down. I knew that invading his privacy would only lead to pain. But my thumb hovered over the screen and my eyes caught my name. I scrolled up, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The messages were dated from the week before she arrived. Darius had written, "She is impossible mother. She is getting lazy and she complains about everything. I do not know if she is cut out for this. Maybe you were right about her background." And then Ms. Viola responds, the words that made my blood run cold. She wrote, "Do not worry, son. I will be there on Monday. We will nip this in the bud. I will straighten her out. You have to break the spirit of these stubborn girls before they get too comfortable. We need to remind her of her place. By the time the baby comes, she will understand who really runs that house. Just let me handle her. I will teach her how to be a proper Morrison wife, or I will make her life so miserable she will wish she was never born." I dropped the iPad onto the duvet, my hands shaking so violently I could barely breathe. It was not just dislike. It was not just mother-in-law interference. It was a conspiracy. They were talking about me as if I were a wild animal that needed to be broken, a horse that needed to be tamed. The betrayal was total. Darius had not just vented to his mother. He had invited her in to abuse me. He had sanctioned this torture. He had agreed that I needed to be fixed, that my spirit needed to be crushed. Every criticism, every tossed spice jar, every insult about my clothes was part of a coordinated attack to destroy my self-esteem and make me compliant. I looked at the bathroom door, listening to the sound of the water running. The man in there, the man whose child I was carrying, was not my partner. He was my enemy. He viewed me with contempt. He viewed my independence as a flaw that needed to be corrected. The realization was physically painful, a sharp ache in the center of my chest that spread outward until my whole body throbbed with it. I placed the iPad back exactly where I found it. I forced myself to get out of bed, to wash my face, to put on my clothes. I moved like a robot, my mind racing. I knew then that I was alone. I had no allies in this house. I was living with two predators who were playing a game with my life and my sanity. But along with the fear came something else. A cold, hard anger, a clarity. They wanted to break me. They wanted to turn me into a submissive doll. But they had underestimated me. They had forgotten that I was the daughter of a woman who worked 2 jobs to put me through college. They had forgotten that I had dignity. I went to work that day in a daze, teaching my classes on autopilot. But beneath the surface, a storm was brewing. I was done being polite. I was done being the good wife. I was done swallowing their poison. When I arrived home that afternoon, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Ms. Viola Carr was in the driveway, but she was nowhere to be seen on the first floor. I walked through the living room, the silence heavy and oppressive. I had a bad feeling, a prickly sensation on the back of my neck that told me something was wrong. I walked down the hallway toward the nursery. This was the one room I had forbidden Ms. Viola from touching. It was my sanctuary. I had spent months curating it, painting the walls a soft sage green, choosing a modern white crib, and hanging whimsical art that made me smile. It was the only place where I felt a true connection to my daughter, untainted by Darius criticism. I pushed open the door and felt the air leave my lungs. The room was unrecognizable. My beautiful white crib was gone. The modern changing table was gone. The art prints were gone. In their place stood heavy, dark antique furniture that smelled of mothballs and old wood. A massive crib that looked like a cage dominated the room, its dark wood scratched and imposing. The curtains had been replaced with heavy velvet drapes that blocked out the light. The room felt suffocating, like a mausoleum rather than a place for a new life. I stood there, my hand flying to my mouth, tears springing to my eyes instantly. This was violence. It was not physical, but it was violence nonetheless. She had violated the most sacred space in my life. She had stripped away my joy, my choices, and my vision for my child. Ms. Viola appeared in the doorway behind me. I turned to look at her, and I saw the smug satisfaction on her face. She said finally, "I had the movers come while you were at work. That flimsy white furniture you bought was trash. This is the Morrison family cradle. Darius slept in it. His father slept in it. Now your daughter will sleep in it. It has history. It has class. You should be thanking me for upgrading this room." Something inside me snapped. It was a physical sensation, like a rubber band breaking in my chest. All the fear, all the hesitation, all the training to be a polite, submissive black woman evaporated in the heat of my rage. This was my child. This was my home, and I was done letting them destroy it. I straightened my spine, ignoring the pain in my back. I looked Miss Viola directly in the eyes, something I had never truly done before. I said, "Get it out." She blinked, her smile faltering for a fraction of a second. She said, "Excuse me." I stepped forward, my voice rising steady and strong. "I said you heard me. Get this ugly, dangerous, dusty furniture out of my daughter room. I did not ask for your help. I did not ask for your opinion. This is my house. This is my baby. And I will not let you turn her room into a museum for your ego. Put my things back. Now." Ms. Viola's face turned a mottled red color. Her eyes bulged. She was not used to being spoken to this way, certainly not by me. She hissed, "You ungrateful little girl. You have no idea what you are talking about. I am trying to give your child a legacy since you have none of your own to offer. I said I have plenty to offer. I have love. I have respect. And I have the common sense to know that you do not come into another woman's home and throw away her things. You are not helping Miss Viola. You are bullying, and I am done. I want this gone before Darius gets home, or I will drag it out to the curb myself." The air in the room crackled with tension. For the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. She had pushed me expecting me to crumble. Instead, I had pushed back. But I knew this victory would be short-lived. I knew that when Darius came home, the real war would begin. But standing there amidst the ruins of my nursery with my hand on my belly, protecting my daughter, I realized I did not care. I was ready to fight. I had found my voice, and no amount of gaslighting or manipulation was going to silence me again. Ms. Viola narrowed her eyes, her lips pressing into a thin white line. She pulled her phone out of her pocket. She said, "We will see what my son has to say about this disrespect." I watched her dial his number, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I knew what was coming. I knew he would take her side. I knew I was about to face the monster I had seen in those text messages. But as I looked at the dark, oppressive crib that she had forced into my space, I knew I could not back down. Not this time. Not when my daughter's future was at stake. I stood my ground, waiting for the front door to open, waiting for the storm to break. The silence that followed my demand was not the silence of peace, but the vacuum before an explosion. Ms. Viola stared at me for a heartbeat, her mouth agape in disbelief that the girl from North Portland had dared to speak to a Morrison with such authority. But the shock quickly morphed into a cold, venomous rage. She did not back down. She did not apologize. Instead, she stepped closer, invading my personal space until I could smell the mint and old coffee on her breath. She laughed a harsh, grating sound that lacked any mirth, and shook her head as if I were a pitiful child who had just made a fatal error. She told me that I was trash. She said that she knew from the moment Darius brought me home that I was nothing but a gold digger looking for a step up in the world. She screamed that I was ungrateful and that I had no class, no breeding, and no right to dictate what happened in a house that her son paid for. She called my taste cheap and my background dirty, throwing my mother's struggle to raise me in my face as if poverty was a moral failing. Her voice rose in pitch, echoing off the walls of the nursery, bouncing around the heavy, dark furniture she had forced into the room. I stood my ground, shaking not from fear, but from the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I tried to speak again to tell her that money did not buy manners, but she cut me off. She was screaming now, ranting about how I was ruining her son's life, how I was a burden, and how she should have stopped the wedding when she had the chance. And then we heard it. The sound of the front door opening downstairs. The heavy thud of expensive leather shoes on the hardwood floor. Darius was home. Ms. Viola's demeanor changed instantly. It was a transformation so sudden and terrifying it made my head spin. The venom vanished from her face, replaced by a mask of frailty and distress. She slumped her shoulders. She forced tears into her eyes. She let out a wail that sounded nothing like the woman who had just been verbally eviscerating me. She ran out of the nursery and toward the stairs, her voice pitching into a hysterical sob. She cried out, "Darius! Oh, thank God you are home. Help me, son. Please help me." I stood frozen in the nursery, my hands still protective over my belly, listening to the performance unfolding on the landing. I heard Darius rushing up the stairs, taking them two at a time. I heard his voice urgent and concerned, asking her what happened. I walked to the doorway just in time to see Ms. Viola collapse into his arms. She buried her face in his chest, sobbing loudly, pointing a shaking finger at me. She lied. She looked him in the eye and lied with a conviction that was chilling. She said that I had attacked her. She said that I had screamed at her for trying to help, and that when she tried to calm me down, I had shoved her. She claimed that I had threatened to throw her out of the house, that I had called her names, and that I had pushed her against the wall. She said I was just trying to fix the nursery, Darius. I wanted it to be perfect, and she went crazy. "Look at my arm." She grabbed me. "I am afraid of her son. I am afraid for the baby with a mother this unstable." It was a masterclass in manipulation. Every word was designed to trigger his protective instincts and his deep-seated class prejudices. She painted me as the angry, violent woman from the wrong side of the tracks and herself as the benevolent victim. I watched Darius' face as he listened. I waited for him to look at me to ask for my side of the story. I waited for the man who had slept beside me for 2 years to recognize that his wife was not a violent person, but he did not look for the truth. He looked for a target. His expression shifted from concern for his mother to a cold, dark fury. His jaw clenched so hard I could see the muscle jumping beneath the skin. His eyes, which had once looked at me with what I thought was love, turned black with hatred. He did not see Simone, his wife. He did not see the mother of his child. He saw the enemy his mother had been warning him about. He saw the disrespect she had whispered in his ear. He gently disengaged from his mother, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. He told her to go to the guest room, to lock the door, and to wait for him. He said he would handle this. Miss Viola cast one last look at me, a look of pure, triumphant malice, before she scurried away, dabbing at her dry eyes with a handkerchief. She had lit the fuse, and now she was retreating to a safe distance to watch the explosion. Darius turned to face me. He was standing 10 feet away at the top of the stairs, but I could feel the heat of his rage radiating across the distance. He did not say a word at first. He just breathed heavily, his nostrils flaring, his chest rising and falling with jagged breaths. Then he started walking toward me. I instinctively took a step back into the nursery. I said, "Darius, please listen. That is not what happened. She is lying. I never touched her." He did not stop. He did not blink. He walked into the nursery and kicked the door shut behind him with a violence that made the frame rattle. The sound was like a gunshot in the small room. We were alone. And for the first time in my life, I was terrified of my husband. Darius stalked toward me, forcing me to retreat until my back hit the heavy wooden dresser Ms. Viola had moved in. I was trapped. To my left was the imposing dark crib. To my right was the wall. And in front of me was a man who looked like he wanted to destroy me. He began to speak, his voice low and trembling, with a suppressed violence that was more frightening than shouting. He called me names that no woman should ever hear, let alone from the man she married. He called me a ghetto rat. He called me a manipulative bitch. He said I was trash who had tricked him into marriage, and that I was trying to drive a wedge between him and the only person who truly loved him. He said, "How dare you? How dare you put your hands on my mother? Who do you think you are? You are nothing without me. You would be living in a roach-infested apartment in North Portland if I had not saved you. And this is how you repay me. By assaulting my mother in my own house." I tried to defend myself. I tried to keep my voice calm, even as tears streamed down my face. I told him to look at me. I told him to think. I said, "Darius, I am 7 months pregnant. I can barely walk. How could I shove anyone? She threw away my things, Darius. She took apart the nursery. I just asked her to leave." But he was not listening. He was too far gone. The narrative his mother had spun fit too perfectly with his own insecurities and his need for control. He wanted to believe I was the villain because it justified the contempt he had been feeling for months. He stepped closer, invading my space until he was inches from my face. Spittle flew from his mouth as he screamed. He accused me of being jealous of his mother. He accused me of being mentally unstable. He said that maybe I was not fit to be a mother if I could not control my temper. The insults were like physical blows, each one landing on a bruise that was already tender. He attacked my intelligence, my appearance, my family. He stripped away every layer of my dignity, leaving me raw and exposed. But it was his eyes that terrified me the most. I looked into them, searching for a trace of the man I had married, but he was gone. There was no recognition in his gaze. There was only a blank, cold hatred. It was the look of a predator looking at prey. It was the look of a man who had given himself permission to do the unthinkable. My survival instinct kicked in. It was a primal alarm bell ringing in the base of my skull. This was not an argument. This was not a marital spat. This was danger, mortal danger. I stopped trying to argue. I stopped trying to reason with him. I focused entirely on protecting my child. I wrapped both arms around my swollen belly, curving my shoulders inward, trying to make myself as small as possible. I tried to shield Imani from his voice, from his rage, from the violence radiating off him in waves. I whispered, "Please, Darius, you are scaring me. Please stop. Think about the baby." but mentioning the baby seemed to trigger him further. He looked at my stomach with a sneer. He said, "Do not use my child as a shield. You do not care about that baby. If you did, you would not be acting like a savage. You need to be taught a lesson, Simone. You need to learn respect." He raised his hand. I flinched, squeezing my eyes shut, turning my head to the side, bracing for the impact. I whimpered a sound of pure animal fear that I did not recognize as my own. I waited for the strike, praying that it would not land on my stomach, praying that my baby would survive whatever was about to happen. The air in the room was thick with the smell of his expensive cologne, mixed with the metallic tang of fear. Time seemed to slow down. I was hyper-aware of everything. The dust motes dancing in the light of the window, the heavy dark wood of the crib that felt like a cage, the sound of my own heart hammering against my ribs like a frantic drum. I knew in that moment that my marriage was over. I knew that the life I had built, the image of perfection I had tried so hard to maintain, was a lie. But none of that mattered anymore. All that mattered was survival. All that mattered was keeping the tiny, innocent life inside me, safe from the monster who was standing over us, breathing hard, his fists clenched, ready to shatter our world forever. I silently begged God for help, begged for a miracle, but the only answer was the sound of Darius taking one more step closer, closing the distance until there was nowhere left to run. The first blow did not come as a fist, but as an open palm. It connected with the side of my face with a force that snapped my head back and sent a spray of saliva flying across the room. The sound was sickening, a wet meat on meat slap that echoed in the small nursery. For a split second, I did not feel the pain. I only felt the shock. My brain refused to process that Darius, the man who had bought me flowers, the man who had rubbed my feet just weeks ago, had actually struck me. But then the stinging heat blossomed across my cheek, spreading into my ear and jaw, and the reality of my nightmare crashed down on me. I stumbled back, my hand flying to my face, my eyes wide with disbelief. I opened my mouth to speak, to ask him why, but he did not give me the chance. The slap was just the opening salvo. He stepped forward, his movements fluid and practiced as if he had done this 1,000 times before. He shoved me. It was not a playful push or a warning nudge. It was a violent two-handed shove directly to my chest, designed to knock me off my feet. Gravity is a cruel mistress when you are 7 months pregnant. My center of gravity was shifted, my balance compromised by the extra weight I carried. I flailed my arms, searching for something to grab onto, but there was nothing but air. I went down hard. I twisted my body instinctively in midair, sacrificing my shoulder and hip to the hardwood floor to keep my belly from taking the direct impact. I hit the ground with a bone-jarring thud that knocked the wind out of me. A sharp, agonizing pain shot up my left side, radiating from my hip to my ribs. I gasped for air, my lungs seizing, but my first thought was not for myself. It was for Imani. My hands immediately went to my stomach, cradling the round mound of life that was now in mortal danger. I looked up from the floor, my vision swimming, expecting to see horror on Darius' face. I expected him to snap out of it to realize he had gone too far. Instead, I saw his foot drawing back. He kicked me. The toe of his expensive leather dress shoe connected with my thigh, just inches from my belly. The pain was blinding, white-hot, and sharp. I screamed a raw, guttural sound that tore through my throat. I tried to scramble away, dragging my heavy body across the polished floor, but he was faster. He kicked me again, this time in the ribs. I heard a crack, a sickening sound that told me something inside me had broken. I curled into a ball, bringing my knees up as high as they would go, wrapping my arms tightly around my head and stomach. I became a human shield for my daughter. I made myself small. I made myself pathetic. I hoped that if I looked broken enough, he would stop. He did not stop. He loomed over me, a giant of rage and shadow. He dropped to his knees, straddling my legs, pinning me to the floor. His fists began to rain down on me. He hit my arms, which were covering my face. He hit my shoulders. He hit the side of my head. Each blow was a detonation of pain. My ears rang with a high-pitched whine that drowned out the sound of my own sobbing. I shouted through the blood filling my mouth. "Darius, please. The baby. Darius, your child. It is your daughter." But he was not hearing me. His eyes were glazed over, focused on some internal demon that I could not see. He was grunting with the exertion of beating me, putting his full weight behind every punch. He was trying to erase me. He was trying to punish me for daring to have a voice, for daring to stand up to his mother, for daring to be anything other than a silent, obedient vessel. Through the haze of pain and terror, I heard a sound that chilled me more than the blows. It was a voice from the doorway, Ms. Viola. She had not locked herself in the guest room. She had not hidden away in fear. She was watching. I could not see her clearly through my swollen eyes, but I heard her voice cutting through the violence, sharp and approving. She said, "Teach her, Darius. Show her who is the head of this house. She needs to learn." She was cheering him on. A mother was watching her son beat his pregnant wife, and she was justifying it. She was treating my torture as a necessary correction, a lesson that needed to be taught. The cruelty of it shattered whatever piece of my heart was still intact. I realized then that I was not just fighting a man. I was fighting a legacy of dysfunction, a generational curse that viewed women as property to be managed and broken. The pain was everywhere now. My body was a map of agony. My ribs throbbed with every shallow breath. My face felt swollen and hot. My arm, where I had blocked his fists, felt dead and heavy. But the worst pain was the fear. It was a cold, sharp terror that centered in my womb. I felt Imani thrashing inside me. She was distressed. She was feeling my adrenaline, my fear, and the physical trauma of the assault. I prayed. I did not pray for him to stop because I knew he would not. I prayed for endurance. I prayed for a shell to harden around my baby to protect her soft, forming bones from her father rage. I clenched my teeth, tasting the metallic tang of blood, and I promised her silently that if we survived this, I would never let him near her again. I would crawl over broken glass. I would walk through fire. I would do anything to keep her safe. But first I had to survive the man who was currently trying to kill us. Suddenly the blows stopped. The silence that rushed into the room was deafening. I lay there on the floor, trembling violently, my breath coming in ragged gasps, waiting for the next hit. But it did not come. I risked opening one swollen eye. Darius was standing over me, his chest heaving, his knuckles red and raw. He was looking down at the floor near my legs. I followed his gaze, and my heart stopped. Blood. There was blood on the light oak floorboards, bright red, fresh, terrifying blood. It was pooling beneath me, staining the hem of my maternity dress, soaking into the rug. It was not coming from a cut on my face. It was coming from between my legs. The sight of the blood seemed to snap Darius out of his trance. The monster receded, and the coward took its place. His eyes went wide, his face drained of color. He stepped back, his hands shaking, looking from the blood to me and back again. He realized in that moment that he had crossed a line he could not uncross. He had endangered his heir. He had created evidence that could not be explained away with a gaslighting speech. Panic replaced the rage. But it was not panic for me, it was panic for himself. He dropped to his knees beside me not to comfort me, but to assess the damage to his reputation. He said, "Oh God. Simone, what did you make me do? Look what you made me do." He was still blaming me. Even with my blood on his floor, he was framing himself as the victim. From outside the house, a sound cut through the heavy atmosphere of the nursery. Sirens. Loud, approaching, wailing sirens. They were getting louder by the second. Mrs. Henderson, my neighbor. She was an elderly woman who spent her days on her front porch watching the neighborhood. She must have heard the screaming. She must have heard the violence. She was my guardian angel in a floral housecoat. Darius heard the sirens too. He scrambled up from the floor, his eyes darting around the room like a trapped rat. He looked at Ms. Viola, who was still standing in the doorway, her face now pale with realization. He said, "Mother, get downstairs. Open the door. Tell them she fell. Tell them she tripped on the rug. Go." Ms. Viola disappeared instantly, her heels clicking rapidly on the stairs. Darius turned back to me. He grabbed a throw blanket from the chair and tried to wipe the blood from the floor, his movements frantic and clumsy. Then he threw the blanket over me, covering my battered body. He leaned down close to my face, his breath hot on my skin. The concern in his voice was fake, a performance for an audience that had not even entered the room yet. He whispered, Listen to me, Simone. You fell. Do you hear me? You tripped over the rug and you fell. If you tell them anything else, if you try to ruin my life, I swear to God, I will take that baby away from you. I will prove you are unstable. I have the money. I have the lawyers. You will never see her again. The threat hung in the air, toxic and heavy. He knew my greatest fear was losing my child. He was weaponizing my motherhood against me, even as I lay bleeding from his abuse. I heard heavy boots on the stairs, voices shouting. The paramedics were here. Darius' smooth mask slid into place. He let out a sob, a convincing sound of anguish. He grabbed my hand, the same hand he had just been hitting, and held it to his cheek. He shouted up here, "Please hurry. My wife. She fell. There is so much blood. Please help us." Two paramedics burst into the room, followed by a police officer. They were a blur of motion and efficiency. They saw me on the floor, covered in the blanket, saw the blood pooling, saw the distraught husband kneeling beside me. They saw the scene Darius wanted them to see. One paramedic, a tall man with a gentle face, knelt beside me. He began checking my vitals, asking me questions. "Can you hear me? What is your name? Do you know where you are?" I tried to speak, but my jaw was swollen and my throat felt like it was filled with glass. I looked at Darius. He was staring at me, his eyes pleading on the surface but hard and threatening underneath. I whispered, "I fell." It was the hardest lie I had ever told. It tasted like ash, but I was trapped. I was injured, bleeding, and terrified. I believed his threat. I believed that he could take Imani away from me, so I protected her the only way I knew how in that moment. I bought us time. They loaded me onto a stretcher. The pain of moving was excruciating. Every bump, every shift sent waves of fire through my body. They carried me down the stairs past Ms. Viola, who was standing in the hallway clutching her pearls, looking the picture of the worried grandmother. I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to tell the police that she had stood there and watched. But I remained silent, my energy focused entirely on holding on to the life inside me. The ambulance ride was a journey into a new level of hell. The space was cramped, filled with the beeping of monitors and the smell of antiseptic. The paramedic was working on me, hooking up IV lines, putting an oxygen mask over my face, checking for the baby heartbeat. Darius insisted on coming with us. He sat on the bench beside the stretcher, holding my hand. To the paramedics, he looked like a devoted husband refusing to leave his wife's side. To me, he was a jailer ensuring his prisoner did not speak. The vehicle swayed and bumped as we sped toward the hospital. With every jolt, I felt a tightening in my abdomen. It started as a dull cramp, then hardened into a wave of pressure that wrapped around my back and squeezed. Contractions. I squeezed my eyes shut, tears leaking out the corners. No, not yet. It was too soon. I was only 7 months along. Imani's lungs were not ready. She was too small. I looked at the paramedic, my eyes wide with panic. I grabbed his sleeve. I whispered the baby. "Is she okay? I feel cramps." The paramedic face tightened slightly, though he tried to hide it. He placed a hand on my abdomen, feeling the hardness of the contraction. He looked at the monitor. He said, "Just try to breathe, ma'am. We are giving you fluids. We are going to get you there as fast as we can. The baby heart rate is a little fast, but it is strong. Just hold on. A little fast." That meant distress. That meant she was suffering. The guilt washed over me, drowning me. I had let this happen. I had stayed too long. I had not protected her. Darius squeezed my hand, hard. His fingers dug into my palm, pressing against the bones. It was a sharp, painful reminder of his presence. I looked at him. He was leaning forward, his face a mask of concern for the paramedic benefit, but his eyes were drilling into mine. He whispered, "Stay calm, honey. You need to stay calm for the baby. Do not get hysterical. Do not talk." That is what he meant. Do not tell them what really caused the stress. Do not tell them why you are in labor. I pulled my hand away from him, feigning a need to adjust my position. I could not stand his touch. It made my skin crawl. It felt like being touched by a corpse. I closed my eyes and turned inward, shutting out the sirens, shutting out Darius, shutting out the pain. I focused on the tiny life inside me. I visualized her. I saw her perfect little hands, her tiny feet. I started a conversation with God. I was not a woman who prayed every day, but in that ambulance I became a fervent believer. I prayed, God, please, take me if you have to, take everything I have. But save her. Keep her inside. Do not let her come yet. She is not ready. I will do anything. I will leave him. I will run away. I will never look back. Just give me the chance to save her. Please, God, do not let his hate kill my love. Do not let his violence extinguish her light. She is innocent. She is named Faith. Please give us faith. The contractions came closer together. The pain was rhythmic, relentless. I could feel my body trying to expel the baby, trying to reject the trauma it had absorbed. I fought it. I willed my muscles to relax. I willed my cervix to stay closed. I fought Darius' violence with every ounce of maternal instinct I possessed. The ambulance screeched to a halt. The doors flew open. Cool night air rushed in, mixed with the sounds of the hospital bay. Voices shouted orders. I was being moved again, wheeled fast over pavement, then tile. Darius was running alongside the stretcher, keeping pace, keeping guard. But as the bright fluorescent lights of the emergency room washed over me, I felt a strange sense of clarity amidst the chaos. I had survived the beating. I was still alive. And as long as I had breath in my body, I was going to fight him. The fear was still there, huge and paralyzing, but underneath it a new feeling was taking root, a cold, hard determination. He had tried to kill us. He had failed. And now it was my turn. The antiseptic air of the emergency room did nothing to cleanse the memory of the blood on my nursery floor. The trauma bay was a whirlwind of activity, with nurses hooking me up to monitors that beeped in a rhythmic, uncaring cadence. My body felt like a shattered mosaic, held together only by the thin cotton of the hospital gown. Every breath was a negotiation with pain. My ribs screamed in protest each time my lungs expanded, and a deep, throbbing ache radiated from my lower back where he had kicked me, but the physical agony was distant, almost muffled compared to the screaming terror in my mind. A young male doctor entered the cubicle holding a tablet and looking harried. He scanned the monitors briefly before turning his attention to the bed. He did not look me in the eye. He looked at the swollen purple bruise blooming on my cheekbone and the way I was curled protectively around my stomach. He asked Mrs. Morrison, "Can you tell me what happened tonight?" I opened my mouth to speak, but the words turned to ash in my throat. My eyes darted to the corner of the room where Darius stood. He was leaning against the wall, his arms crossed, his expensive suit jacket unbuttoned to show the crisp white shirt underneath. To anyone else, he looked like a worried husband keeping vigil. To me, he looked like an executioner waiting for a signal. His eyes were hard, flat stones that promised retribution if I dared to deviate from the script. Before I could force a sound out, Darius stepped forward, smooth and confident. He placed a hand on the railing of the bed, effectively placing himself between me and the doctor. He said it was just a terrible accident, doctor. Simone has been having trouble with her balance lately. You know how it is in the third trimester. She was in the nursery trying to move some things around, and she tripped on the area rug. She fell hard right into the corner of the heavy oak crib. He shook his head, his voice dropping to a register of deep regret. He continued, "I told her to wait for me. I told her I would move the furniture. But she is so stubborn. She is always trying to do everything herself. I heard the crash from downstairs and I ran up as fast as I could, but she was already on the floor. The lie was perfect. It was plausible. It played into the stereotype of the clumsy pregnant woman and the stubborn independent wife. It absolved him of everything and placed the blame squarely on my shoulders. I was not a victim. I was just clumsy. I was just difficult." The doctor frowned, tapping on his tablet. He said, "Well, that explains the bruising on the side and the hip. But these rib fractures are severe, and the fetal monitoring is showing some irregularities. We are concerned about a placental abruption from the impact. This must have been a very violent fall." Darius did not flinch. He reached out and stroked my hair, his fingers trailing down to rest on my shoulder. His touch made my skin crawl. It was a claim of ownership. He said, "She hit the floor very hard, doctor. It was terrifying. Please just do whatever you have to do to help her. We are so worried about the baby." I lay there trapped in a prison of silence. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab the doctor by his white coat and tell him to look at the fingerprints on my arm. I wanted to tell him that women do not fall onto fists. But the fear was a physical weight on my chest, heavier than the broken ribs. I knew that Darius would charm his way out of any accusation I made right now. And then when we were alone, when the witnesses were gone, he would make good on his threat to take Imani away. So I swallowed the truth. I let it burn a hole in my stomach, and I nodded weakly when the doctor asked if I was in pain. I became an accomplice to my own abuse because I could not see a way out. Then the curtain parted, and the atmosphere in the room shifted. A woman walked in. She was wearing navy blue scrubs and comfortable shoes that had seen miles of hospital corridors. Her ID badge clipped to her pocket read, Regina. She was a tall woman with dark skin and silver woven into her braids, which were pulled back into a practical bun. She was in her mid-40s, and she carried herself with an air of absolute authority. She did not look like someone who took orders. She looked like someone who gave them. Regina moved to the bedside, not with the frantic energy of the doctor, but with a calm, deliberate purpose. She greeted the doctor with a nod, and then turned her full attention to me. Her eyes were dark and deep, intelligent and observing. She did not look at the machines first. She looked at my face. She looked at the tear tracks drying on my cheeks. She looked at the way my hands were white-knuckled, gripping the sheets. She said, "Hello, Simone. My name is Regina. I am going to be your nurse tonight. Let us get you more comfortable." Her voice was a warm contralto, soothing and steady. She began to adjust the pillows behind my head, moving with a gentleness that made me want to weep. She checked the IV line, her hands efficient and sure. Then she moved to check my blood pressure on my left arm. I flinched when she touched my arm. The reaction was involuntary, a spasm of pain and fear. Regina paused. She gently lifted the sleeve of my hospital gown, pushing it up to my shoulder. There on my upper arm were the marks, 4 distinct oval bruises on the inside and a thumbprint on the outside. They were dark, angry purple against my skin. They were not the result of a fall. They were the result of a hand grabbing, squeezing, and holding with brutal force. Regina went still. She stared at the bruises for a long moment. I held my breath, my heart hammering against my ribs. I waited for her to ask what happened. I waited for her to buy the lie. But she did not ask. She slowly raised her head and looked across the bed at Darius. Darius was smiling at her, that charming, ingratiating smile he used on bank tellers and waitresses. He said she got those when I tried to catch her nurse. I grabbed her arm to try to stop her from falling, but I was too late. I feel terrible about it. I guess I do not know my own strength. Regina did not smile back. Her face remained impassive, a mask of professional neutrality. But her eyes told a different story. They swept over Darius, dissecting him. She looked at his expensive suit. She looked at his relaxed posture. She looked at the knuckles of his right hand, which were slightly swollen and red. She saw him. It was a terrifying and electric moment. For the first time all night, someone was not buying his act. Regina knew. Regina. She had been a nurse for 20 years. She had seen battered women before. She knew the difference between a clumsy fall and a defensive wound. She knew that husbands who try to catch falling wives do not leave fingerprint bruises that suggest a struggle. She turned her gaze back to me. She leaned in close, pretending to check the oxygen cannula in my nose. Her face was inches from mine. She said, "Look at me, Simone." I raised my eyes to meet hers, and in that exchange of glances, something powerful happened. It was a silent communication, a frequency that only we could hear. I saw a fierce recognition in her eyes. I saw the shared history of Black women who have had to carry the weight of the world, who have had to protect their families, who have had to survive in silence. She did not say, "I know he beat you." She did not have to. Her eyes said it. They said, "I see you, sister. I see the fear. I see the trap. And I am not going to leave you in it." I felt a crack in the wall of my terror, a tiny fissure of hope. Someone else knew the truth. I was not alone in this room with a monster anymore. I was in here with a warrior. Regina gave my shoulder a squeeze. It was firm, deliberate. It was a promise. She said, "You are doing great. We are going to take care of everything. You just focus on breathing." She straightened up and turned her back to Darius, moving to the computer terminal in the room. I watched her posture change. Her spine straightened, her shoulders squared. She was not just charting vitals, she was formulating a plan. She was assessing the enemy and preparing to strike. I looked at Darius. He was checking his watch, looking bored now that the initial drama had subsided. He had no idea. He thought he was the smartest person in the room. He thought his money and his suit and his smooth lies protected him. He did not realize that he had just underestimated the most dangerous force in nature, a black woman who has decided enough is enough. Regina typed something into the computer, her fingers flying across the keys. Then she turned back to the room, her face calm, but her eyes burning with a cold resolve. She had a plan. I did not know what it was yet, but I trusted her. In a world that had failed me completely, in a marriage that had turned into a nightmare, this stranger with the kind eyes and the strong hands was the only lifeline I had, and I held on to it with everything I had left. Regina stood by the computer terminal, her fingers hovering over the keyboard, but her eyes were fixed on Darius. The room was thick with the scent of rubbing alcohol and the underlying metallic tang of my fear. I watched her from the hospital bed, my body trembling under the thin cotton sheet. I saw her calculate the angles. I saw her assess the threat level. She knew that Darius was dangerous. She knew that if she accused him directly, he would explode, or worse, he would lawyer up and drag me out of the hospital before anyone could stop him. She needed to be smarter than him. She needed to use his own arrogance and his fear of consequences against him. She took a deep breath and turned fully to face him. Her expression was a masterpiece of professional detachment. She did not look like a woman who wanted to claw his eyes out for hurting a pregnant sister. She looked like a tired bureaucrat who was simply following a boring protocol. She said, "Sir, I need to update you on a few changes to our hospital intake procedures. Since your wife is 7 months pregnant and presenting with injuries consistent with trauma, we are legally required to document everything with high-resolution photography." Darius nodded dismissively, checking his watch again. He said, "Fine, take your pictures. We have nothing to hide. It was a fall. Just get it over with so we can go home." Regina did not move. She kept her hands clasped in front of her and tilted her head slightly to the side. She continued, actually, "Sir, it is a bit more complicated than that. You see, due to the recent rise in domestic violence cases, the state legislature passed a new mandate last month. It is called the Maternal Protection Act. It requires that all photographs of injuries on pregnant patients be automatically uploaded to a secure server at the police precinct. It is an algorithmic system. As soon as I take the photos, the software analyzes the bruising patterns to determine if they are consistent with a fall or with other causes." I watched Darius freeze. His hand, which had been resting casually on the bed rail, went rigid. The color began to drain from his face, starting at his forehead and washing down to his neck until he looked like a wax figure. Regina pressed on her voice, smooth and relentless. She said, "It is completely automated. No human being can intervene. Once the images are in the system, they are cross-referenced with forensic databases. If the algorithm flags the injuries as suspicious, it automatically dispatches a detective to the hospital to take a statement. It is out of my hands. It is out of the doctor's hands. It is just the law now." The silence in the room was absolute. The hum of the air conditioning seemed to roar in my ears. I looked at Darius, and for the first time in months, I saw genuine terror in his eyes. He was a finance man. He understood systems. He understood audit trails. He understood that you could not bribe a software program. He could charm a person. He could intimidate a wife, but he could not intimidate an algorithm. He stammered, "Well, that seems excessive. I mean, it was clearly an accident. Why would we want to waste police resources on a simple slip and fall?" Regina shrugged, appearing bored. She said, "I agree, sir. It is a lot of paperwork for me, too. But if it really was just a fall, the software will see that immediately. The physics of a fall are very specific. The bruising is diffuse and impact-based. However, grip marks or repeated strikes have a very distinct heat signature and pattern. The computer never makes a mistake. So if you are telling the truth, you have nothing to worry about. The police will not even be notified." She had him. She had backed him into a corner so tight he could not breathe. If he refused the photos, he looked guilty. If he allowed them, he believed he would be caught by this imaginary supercomputer. He was trapped between his lies and his self-preservation. I watched the sweat bead on his upper lip. I watched his eyes dart toward the door. He was calculating the risk. He was weighing the cost of his reputation against his need to control me. Regina decided to twist the knife. She picked up a camera from the counter, a bulky device with a large lens. She said so. I am going to need to do a full body exam now. I need to photograph the back, the thighs, and the abdomen, because this is a sterile forensic procedure, and because of patient privacy laws regarding the collection of legal evidence, I am going to need you to step out to the waiting room. Darius looked at her. He looked at the camera. He looked at me. I held my breath, praying he would leave, praying he would not see through her bluff. But Regina played her part perfectly. She did not look eager for him to leave. She looked like she was just doing her job. He swallowed hard, his Adam apple bobbing in his throat. He looked at me with a mixture of hatred and fear. He squeezed my hand one last time, a painful warning grip. He said, "I will be right outside. Do not say anything stupid, Simone. Remember what we talked about." Then he turned and walked out. His stride was not the confident strut of the master of the house. It was the hurried retreat of a criminal who thinks the sirens are already wailing. He pushed through the door and disappeared into the hallway. Regina waited. She stood completely still, listening to his footsteps fade away. She waited 5 seconds, 10 seconds. She waited until the heavy door clicked shut and settled into its frame. Then the mask dropped. The bureaucratic indifference vanished from her face, instantly replaced by a fierce protective warmth. She put the camera down on the counter with a heavy thud. She did not even turn it on. It was a prop. The whole thing was a brilliant improvised play designed to save my life. She rushed to my bedside, her movements urgent and fluid. She took both of my hands in hers. Her grip was strong, warm, and safe. It felt like an anchor in the storm. She looked deep into my eyes, her gaze piercing through the fog of my trauma. She whispered, "He is gone, Simone. He is in the waiting room, and I am not going to let him back in here. You are safe now. Do you hear me? You are safe." I stared at her, my lower lip trembling. I could not believe it. He was gone. The monster was on the other side of the door. The spell of his control was broken by a few sentences from a nurse who refused to look away. Regina leaned closer, her voice low and intense. She said, "I know he hurt you. I saw the marks on your arm. I saw the terror in your eyes when he looked at you. I know he beat you, but I cannot help you unless you say it. I need you to tell me the truth. Did your husband do this to you?" The question hung in the air. It was the key to my cage. All I had to do was turn it. But the fear was deep. The programming he had instilled in me, the threats about taking Amani, the shame of being a victim, it all swirled in my head. I looked at the door, terrified he would burst back in. Regina squeezed my hands tighter. She said, "Look at me, not the door. Look at me. I have security on speed dial. I have the police on the way. He cannot touch you again. But you have to be brave for your daughter. Tell me, for my daughter, for Amani." The dam broke. A sob ripped through my chest so violent it hurt my broken ribs. I nodded. I squeezed her hands back, desperate to hold on to the reality she was offering. I choked out, "Yes, yes, he did it. He beat me. He kicked me. He said he would kill us." Saying it out loud felt like vomiting up poison. It was painful and messy, but it was necessary. Once the words were out, they could not be taken back. The truth was in the room now, breathing and alive. Regina did not gasp. She did not look shocked. She looked vindicated. She nodded firmly, her eyes shining with unshed tears of empathy. She said, "Okay. Okay, baby. I believe you. I got you." She did not waste a single second. She released one of my hands and reached for the phone on the wall. She punched a code into the keypad. Her voice was steel when she spoke into the receiver. She said, "This is Nurse Regina in Trauma Bay 4. I am initiating a code purple. I have a domestic violence situation with a pregnant patient. The perpetrator is in the waiting room. African-American male, 6 feet tall, wearing a gray suit. I need security to secure the waiting room immediately. Do not let him leave and do not let him back in this unit." She hung up and dialed another number. She said, "Dispatch, this is the ER. I need officers for a statement regarding a felony assault on a pregnant female. Yes, the suspect is on the premises. Hurry." She hung up the phone and turned back to me. She wiped a tear from my cheek with her thumb, her touch as gentle as a mother. She said, "It is done. The cavalry is coming. You did the hardest part, Simone. You told the truth." I lay back against the pillows, sobbing uncontrollably. The relief was overwhelming. It washed over me in waves, crashing against the shores of my pain. I was broken. I was bleeding. I was terrified of what the future held. But for the first time in months, I was free. I listened to the sounds of the hospital, the announcements over the intercom, the squeak of shoes in the hallway, and I knew they were the sounds of my liberation. Nurse Regina had not just treated my injuries, she had seen my soul. She had reached into the darkness of my marriage and pulled me into the light. And as I held my hand over my belly, feeling Imani move, I knew that we were going to survive. The doors to the waiting room did not just open, they burst inward with the force of absolute authority. From my vantage point in the trauma bay where the curtain had been pulled back slightly, I could see the reflection of the commotion in the glass partition of the nurses' station. 2 uniformed police officers marched in their expressions grim and purposeful, followed closely by 2 hospital security guards who looked like linebackers ready for a scrimmage. Nurse Regina stood by my bed, her hand resting on my shoulder, a silent anchor keeping me tethered to the present while my world shifted on its axis. I heard Darius before I saw him. His voice carried that familiar tone of arrogant indignation, the sound of a man who believes his bank account and his suit exempt him from the consequences of his actions. He was demanding to know why he was being detained, why he was not allowed to see his wife, and threatening to call his attorney. But the officers were not impressed by his posturing. They were not finance guys who bowed to money. They were law enforcement officers responding to a felony assault call, and they saw a predator trying to bluff his way out of a cage. Then chaos erupted in the hallway. Ms. Viola had arrived. She must have driven like a maniac to beat the ambulance, or perhaps she had been following us the whole time, lurking in the shadows, just as she had lurked in my home. She swept into the waiting area like a hurricane in a cashmere coat, her eyes wild and her face twisted with a mixture of panic and fury. She saw the officers surrounding her son. She saw the handcuffs glinting under the fluorescent lights as they pulled Darius' arms behind his back. And in that moment, Ms. Viola made the mistake that would seal her son's fate. She let her arrogance override her intelligence. She truly believed that the Morrisons were untouchable, that the rules of society did not apply to them, and that she could bully the police just as she had bullied me. She screamed, "Let him go. What are you doing? You cannot arrest him. He is a good man. He is a father." One of the officers, a stern woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, turned to Ms. Viola, holding up a hand to stop her advance. She said, "Ma'am, step back. We are arresting this man on suspicion of aggravated domestic assault." Ms. Viola laughed a high-pitched hysterical sound that echoed off the sterile walls. She pointed a manicured finger toward the trauma rooms toward me. She shouted, "Assault. That is ridiculous. She is lying. That girl is a liar and a drama queen. My son did not assault anyone. He just slapped her a few times to calm her down. She was hysterical. She was disrespecting him. He was just teaching her a lesson. Since when is it a crime for a man to discipline his own wife in his own house?" The silence that followed her declaration was heavier than lead. The entire waiting room seemed to inhale at once. Ms. Viola stood there, chest heaving, looking from the officers to Darius, expecting agreement, expecting validation. But Darius looked at her with pure horror. His face, which had been pale with fear, now turned a sickly shade of gray. He knew. He knew that his mother, in her twisted attempt to defend him, had just handed the police a confession on a silver platter. She had corroborated the violence. She had admitted that he hit me. She had provided the intent and the motive. The female officer eyes narrowed. She pulled a notepad from her pocket. She said, "Say that again, ma'am. You witnessed the suspect striking the victim." Ms. Viola faltered, realizing too late that the atmosphere had shifted. She stammered, "Well, he did not hurt her. He had to control her. She was out of control." The officer nodded, signaling her partner. She said, "Thank you for your statement, ma'am. You have just confirmed that a battery took place. And since you witnessed a felony and failed to report it and are now attempting to justify it, we will be needing a full statement from you as well." Darius began to shout, then screaming at his mother to shut up, screaming at the police that it was a mistake, but it was too late. The handcuffs clicked shut. The sound was crisp and final. It was the sound of my freedom. I watched as they marched him out. His head hung low, his shoulders slumped, the facade of the powerful, successful husband completely shattered. Ms. Viola followed behind him, flanked by security, still sputtering excuses, still trying to rewrite reality, but her power was gone. Regina squeezed my shoulder hard. She whispered, "Did you hear that, Simone? They got him, and she buried him. It is over." I let out a breath. I felt like I had been holding for 2 years. The monster was in chains. The witch was silenced. But my battle was not over. Just as the doors swung shut behind them, a new and terrible pain ripped through my abdomen. It was not a contraction this time. It was a tearing sensation, a sharp, continuous agony that made my vision white out. The monitors around me began to scream. The rhythmic beep turned into a frantic, high-pitched alarm. The young doctor who had been standing in the background rushed forward, his face pale. He looked at the fetal monitor, which was showing the baby heart rate dropping rapidly. He shouted, "We have a deceleration. Heart rate is down to 60. She is abrupted. We need to move, now." The room exploded into motion. Hands were everywhere, disconnected cables unlocking the wheels of the bed, shouting orders. Regina was running alongside me, her hand still gripping mine. She said, "Stay with us, Simone. Stay with us. We are going to get her out. Just breathe." I was moving down a hallway, the ceiling lights flashing past like strobe lights. My body was on fire. I could feel the life draining out of me, the blood soaking the sheets, but my mind was focused on one thing only: Imani, my daughter, my faith. I grabbed Regina's hand, pulling her down close to my face as they wheeled me into the operating room. I gasped, "Save her. Do not worry about me. Save her, Regina. Promise me." Regina looked at me, her eyes fierce and wet. She said, "I promise. Both of you. We are saving both of you." Then the mask was over my face. The sweet, cloying smell of anesthesia filled my nose. The last thing I heard was the sound of metal instruments clanking on a tray and the urgent voice of the surgeon calling for a scalpel. I closed my eyes and let the darkness take me, praying that when I woke up I would not be alone. I woke up to the sound of beeping. It was a steady, strong rhythm, totally different from the frantic alarm that had sent me into the darkness. My mouth felt like it was stuffed with cotton, and my abdomen burned with a sharp incisional pain, but I was alive. I blinked my eyes open, trying to focus on the blurry shapes around me. I was in a recovery room. The lights were dimmed, and there, sitting in a chair next to my bed, was my mother. She was holding my hand, her head bowed in prayer. When she felt me stir, her head snapped up. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying, but when she saw me looking at her, a smile broke across her face, like the sun coming out after a storm. She said, "Oh, baby. Oh, my sweet girl. You are back. Thank God." I tried to speak, but my voice was a croak. I managed to force out one word. I whispered, "Baby." My mother squeezed my hand and pointed to the other side of the bed. I turned my head slowly, fighting the stiffness in my neck. There, in a clear plastic bassinet, wrapped in a pink blanket with a little knit cap on her head, was my daughter. She was tiny, so incredibly tiny, connected to a few wires and tubes, but she was breathing. Her chest rose and fell with a determination that brought fresh tears to my eyes. She was alive. We had made it. My father stepped into my line of sight then. He looked 10 years older than he had the last time I saw him. His face was etched with a mixture of rage and relief. He leaned down and kissed my forehead, his rough hand trembling against my skin. He said, "She is beautiful, Simone. She is a fighter, just like her mama." Regina came in a moment later. She was not wearing her scrubs anymore. She was in street clothes, looking exhausted but happy. She came to the foot of the bed and smiled at me. She said, "You scared us there for a minute." But Dr. Evans is a wizard. He got her out in 4 minutes flat. She is small, 4 pounds and 2 ounces, but her lungs are surprisingly strong. She is going to need some time in the NICU, but she is going to be fine. I looked at my daughter again. I looked at her perfect little hands clenching and unclenching. I thought about the name I had chosen in the ambulance, the prayer I had whispered to the universe. I said her name is Imani. My mother nodded, wiping her eyes. She said, Faith. That is a beautiful name, baby. I said, it is not just a name. It is what saved us. I had to have faith that we would survive. I had to have faith that someone would help us. The next few days were a blur of pain and healing. The physical recovery from the C-section was difficult, made harder by the broken ribs and the bruising from the assault. Every time I laughed, every time I coughed, it felt like my body was coming apart. But the emotional healing began the moment I held Imani for the first time. It was 2 days after the surgery. The nurses helped me into a wheelchair and took me to the NICU. They opened the porthole of her incubator and let me slide my hands under her tiny body. I felt her warmth, her fragility, and her immense strength. I looked at her face, and I searched for traces of Darius. I was terrified I would see him. I was terrified I would look at my child and see the monster who tried to kill her. But I did not see him. I saw me. I saw my mother. I saw the ancestors who had survived generations of struggle so that we could be here. I saw a blank slate, a new beginning. I leaned my forehead against the plastic and wept, not from sadness, but from a fierce, overwhelming gratitude. I promised her then and there that she would never know violence. She would never know fear. She would only know love. My parents were incredible. They never said I told you so. They never asked why I stayed so long. They just surrounded me with a wall of protection. My father took over dealing with the police and the lawyers. My mother took over feeding me and washing my hair. They became the safety net I had been too proud and too scared to ask for. And Regina checked on me every single day. She was not just my nurse anymore. She was my savior. She brought me magazines. She brought me news about the legal proceedings. She brought me hope. She told me that the district attorney was throwing the book at Darius. Because of the medical evidence, the photographs, and Ms. Viola confession, they had a rock-solid case. He was not getting out on bail. He was sitting in a cell realizing that his money could not buy his way out of this one. When I was finally discharged a week later, I did not go back to the house with the dark furniture and the bad memories. My father had already hired movers to pack up my personal things and bring them to their house. I left the expensive prison behind without a backward glance. I sat in the back seat of my parents' car. Imani buckled safely into her car seat beside me and watched the hospital disappear in the rearview mirror. I was in pain. I was tired, and I was starting over from scratch at 36 years old. But as I looked at the sky, a brilliant clear blue, I felt lighter than I had in years. I was free. The wheels of justice turned slowly, but they grind exceedingly fine. The legal battle that followed was grueling, but I did not face it alone. I had my parents. I had a fierce female attorney who specialized in domestic violence cases, and I had the truth. Darius tried to fight at first. His high-priced lawyers tried to get the evidence suppressed. They tried to paint me as unstable. They tried to argue that Ms. Viola's statement was made under duress. But the judge, a stern woman who had seen too many cases like mine, was having none of it. The photos Regina had taken, the ones Darius thought would be analyzed by an algorithm, were projected in the courtroom. The bruises, the fingerprints, the violence etched into my skin silenced the defense table. Faced with the overwhelming evidence and the reality that a jury would likely give him the maximum sentence, Darius took a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to felony assault and child endangerment. I stood in the courtroom on the day of his sentencing. I wore a bright yellow dress the color of sunshine and hope. I stood tall, my shoulders back, my eyes dry. I looked at him as he stood before the judge in his orange jumpsuit, shorn of his expensive suits and his arrogance. He looked small. He looked pathetic. He refused to meet my eyes. The judge sentenced him to 3 years in state prison, followed by 5 years of strict probation. It was not enough time, not for the trauma he had caused, but it was a victory. He was a convicted felon. He would never work in finance again. His reputation was destroyed. Most importantly, the judge granted me full sole legal and physical custody of Imani. Darius was granted no visitation rights until he completed a strict batterer intervention program, and even then it would be at the discretion of the court. Ms. Viola was granted a permanent restraining order forbidding her from coming within 500 feet of me or my daughter. As the bailiff led him away, I felt the final chain break. I walked out of that courthouse into the bright afternoon sun, and I breathed deep. The air tasted sweet. It tasted like justice. 2 years later, the coffee shop was buzzing with the morning rush. The smell of roasted beans and cinnamon filled the air. I sat at a corner table, my laptop open, organizing the agenda for tonight's meeting. I looked up as the bell above the door jingled, and a familiar face walked in. Regina looked exactly the same, her braids now fully silver, her smile just as warm. She spotted me and waved, making her way through the crowd. I stood up to hug her, holding her tight. I said, "You are late." Regina laughed, pulling back to look at me. She said, "Hospital time, girl. You know how it is." Shift change was a nightmare. She looked at me, taking in my appearance. I was wearing a tailored blazer, my hair in natural curls, my skin glowing. I looked like a woman who owned her life. She said, "Look at you. You are glowing, Simone. How is the little princess?" I smiled, pulling out my phone to show her the latest picture of Imani. She was 2 years old now, a bundle of energy with a smile that lit up the room. I said, "She is amazing. She is talking up a storm. She asked for a pony for her birthday." I told her we would start with a goldfish. Regina laughed, handing the phone back. She said, "And how is the group going?" I looked down at my laptop. The screen showed the logo for the foundation I had started 6 months ago. The Phoenix Project. It was a support group and advocacy network for Black women survivors of domestic violence. We provided legal resources, emergency housing, and therapy. But mostly we provided a space to be heard, a space to be believed. I said, "It is growing." We had 10 new women join last week. It is heartbreaking that there are so many, but it is healing to know we can help them. I told them your story last night. I told them about the nurse who saved my life with a lie about an algorithm. Regina smiled, shaking her head. She said it was a good lie, was it not? I reached across the table and took her hand. I said it was the best lie anyone has ever told. It gave me my life back. We sat there sipping our coffee, 2 Black women from different generations, bound by a moment of trauma that had transformed into a lifetime of friendship. I looked out the window at the passing cars, at the people going about their days. I was not the same woman I was 2 years ago. That Simone, the one who walked on eggshells, the one who made herself small, she was gone. I had buried her in that nursery. The woman sitting here was forged in fire. I was a mother. I was a survivor. I was an advocate. I thought about Darius sitting in his cell. I thought about Ms. Viola, alone in her big cold house. They had tried to break me. They had tried to use their power to crush my spirit, but they had failed. Success, I realized as I looked at the logo of my foundation, was not about money or status. It was not about the perfect house or the perfect husband. Success was peace. Success was safety. Success was waking up every morning knowing that no one controlled my destiny but me. I looked back at Regina and smiled, a genuine smile that reached all the way to my eyes. I said, "I am happy, Regina. I am really, truly happy." And that was the ultimate revenge. Lesson learned. Trust your intuition and value your worth. This story teaches us that abuse often begins long before the first physical blow. It starts with subtle control, disrespect for your achievements, and isolation from your support system. As women, especially within our community, we often carry the heavy burden of keeping the family together and maintaining an image of strength. But true strength lies in recognizing when a situation is toxic and having the courage to walk away. Never let anyone, not even family, make you feel unworthy or unsafe. Your life and your peace are non-negotiable. If something feels wrong, it is wrong. Reach out, speak up, and choose yourself.